Okay, gents. Lama Karl, Acharya Ugi, Lama in training. Please talk about emptiness and your experience of emptiness practice. What have been your initial and further experiences with emptiness practice? What is the effect of that on your life, on your worldview, on your view of life, and possibly other points you would like to include?
Maybe we could do some ping pong. So if you come up with anything, Ugi, you feel free to interrupt me, and then vice versa. But do you want to start, or I can start if you want?
You can start. Just one mentioning for Kim. If you have still the pin on Zoom, if you have it still pinned, the video, your one, then you won't see us on the recordings.
I don't have mine pinned. It was a disaster. I couldn't use it because I couldn't see the clock of my computer. So I'm not using it.
Okay. Go ahead, Karl.
Well, one thing that I think that is important to start with emptiness, and emptiness is one of those. It's like this cliche theme for a Buddhist talk, but for good reason, because it is the main theme, at least at the outset, and the main majority of Buddhist practice. It's the central theme. So first, maybe to define emptiness from my own experience. Well, actually, emptiness in itself is quite tricky to define because it's not a thing. What emptiness refers to is the lack of something. And what it refers to in the Buddhist context is the lack of self-based contraction. And we can also call these self-based contractions reference points, self-based reference points to which we interpret and experience the world. So these reference points, they are kind of filters, act as filters through which we experience everything. And the unexamined mind, what we call the samsaric mind, the mind that has not been examined, has not been seen through, is basically then a network of these various reference points. So we have the grossest version, what we could call the idea of entityness, or the central me. Then the more subtle but still kind of gross aspects of thoughts, emotions, self-based thoughts, emotions, sensations, feelings, and then of course the most subtle parts of the samsaric mind, the subconscious mind states, or what the hell do we call it? Substrate consciousness. And the thing is that the nature of all of these, even when unexamined, is empty. So the nature of all these various phenomena is always empty, but there is a difference then between recognizing this emptiness and not recognizing the emptiness. So that's kind of a definition of what we mean by emptiness. It's a lack of something that was previously seemed to be through practice. The belief falls away. They no longer seems to be the way that they seemed to be. Do you want to say anything? I'm kind of just going through. I'm going to go jump ahead if. But do you have anything on emptiness before perhaps going into practice?
I think you made the most essential points. What I can add is this lack of something, this lack of a substance, a solidity, a self, is not a philosophical statement. It's not an intellectual claim, because it comes from direct perception. It's actually in direct perception, and I think Karl would arrive there in a minute. It's an unfindability. You look for a core of something, you look for this core substance of an experience or of yourself or of a phenomenon that you're looking at, and you look into its very core, and then you cannot find it. There is nothing to find. But it's not an intellectual claim of non-existence, like it doesn't exist, there is something missing. It's a direct seeing. And yeah, that's what I could add.
Yeah. So it's a lack of that self-based notion, that self-based energy to phenomena. So it's not that phenomena doesn't exist. It's just that it doesn't exist in the way that it might seem to do when caught up in this network. It just reminded me what you said about the philosophical approach, is that usually there are these classical examples used with a wagon, or it could be a car. So the example is used in a way to show, to illustrate the emptiness of things by going to, like, where is the carness of the car? If we remove the car, the wheels, is it still a car, and blah blah blah. But it's much more. We are not talking about these games of mind. We are just talking about, as Ugi says, the direct experience, and of our own bodies, of our own minds. So that should be the starting point. I said that the nature of these phenomena is always empty, even if we haven't recognized it. So the way to go about to recognize it is not by creating anything, but simply by examining examining these phenomena closer, whether it is the central I. So we used a two-part formula to study the notion of a central I, until it then loses this self-referential energy and is seen as empty. And therefore also, and once it's seen as empty, there is, as most of you know, there is nothing you need to do than to continually remind yourself that it's empty. There's a lack of something that previously seemed to be there.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, in the spiritual world, of course, in several traditions, but in Buddhism especially, you hear of that anatta word. Anatta means no self, which is another word for emptiness. And we can get very tricked about this word no self, because sometimes we associate with awakening or seeing through the personal self, we associate with that the idea of, like, you drop your personality, or you drop your personality, your characteristics, your humanity in a sense. But it's not that you drop that or that it goes away. It's just seen from a different perspective. Actually, you see that there is not a core I, a solid I that that is in the core of your personality, that every thought and every perception is referring to, as Karl mentions, these reference points. You see that there isn't really a self in your brain or in your body that is constant and solid and which lives the life that we do in this samsaric world, trying to get that and pushing that away, resisting this and attaching to that, that there is actually no one to be found inside of you in a concrete manner. But yet, your mind functioning still carries on. Even if you see that you're still, you have a personality, there is preferences, you do stuff, you decide stuff, you choose stuff, but it's just that direct seeing that there in the end ultimately is not a core self to be found, like a solid thing.
Yeah, and I would also add that it seems to function much better without, because it takes a lot of energy to constantly create this or to constantly uphold these contractions, these self-reference points. And one example of that is yesterday we practiced Dorje Drölo, a tantric practice of Viparsana. So Viparsana was mentioned yesterday. It is the practical way to look into or to see through the self-based reference points and then access the clarity, emptiness that is the nature of these phenomena. So you have the sutric variety of simply studying whatever comes up that we make use of, but you also have the tantric version where you bring up these enlightened energies, you could call them, these Buddhas, deities that are certain aspects of the mind empty, certain phenomena empty, already empty. In the case of Dorje Drölo and wrathful deities, there is there's that. It's the same dynamic energy that in a samsaric state presents itself as, for example, anger. Except through Dorje Drölo practice, we can experience that energy without the contraction. And it's a totally different thing than with it. There is no resistance then, there is no being pushed, pulled, like squirming underneath the pressure of this mind phenomena. It's just this pure dynamic energy instead. However, as it was hinted yesterday, when we practice these deities and we get to experience the clear or the nature of this dynamic energy, the tendency, what happens is that it activates that part of us that also carries that samsaric stuff, those reactions. So someone said yesterday that it wasn't scary and it wasn't uncomfortable, and the pure dynamic form of the pure mind in any form isn't scary or uncomfortable. But what usually happens is afterwards the stuff comes up because we activated that part of the mind, and then it can get temporarily uncomfortable and somewhat scary. But when we keep at it, it becomes less and less these contractions happen less and less, and completely naturally. As I said, we don't have to keep reminding ourselves that Anger is not scary. Anger is not uncomfortable. It just appears without rubbing against anything.
Yeah, exactly. All phenomena are like this anger that Karl talks about. It's when it's appearing as it is, as it really is, when we see with a clear eye. And another word for Vipassana or emptiness practice is clear seeing, practice of clear seeing, seeing things as they really are. When we see anger as what it really is, a dynamic energy, there's nothing to be afraid of in anger. And I like to bring the example of a rainbow. When we see a rainbow outside, we might think this is a laser ray that can cut us in half if we for the first time see a rainbow and kind of, oh God, there is something very dangerous there in the field, this rainbow. But this is not seeing the rainbow as it is. It's seeing what distorted image we have of the rainbow in our mind. We make the rainbow into more than it is. And that is samsara. We take a phenomena with it, which is in itself harmless if we see it for what it is. But if we don't see that, if we believe our self-based interpretation of that rainbow as something dangerous or something potentially dangerous, then we perceive the rainbow itself as a samsaric distorted phenomenon. And then we fear it. And then we try to avoid it. And then we try to do all kinds of things to keep it away from us. But when we look into the rainbow, which then is emptiness practice, if we face it, like if we face our own anger, or if we face our own self-based thoughts or our own I, whatever we face in this way, this means we look directly into its nature, into how it really is. What is really there when I perceive a rainbow? What is really there when I perceive a thought? What is really there when I perceive my sense of meanness, for example, my sense of ooginess? And if I look into that, then through thorough, direct examination of this phenomenon, I recognize that there is nothing to be found in there, not a self-based contraction, as Karl says, not a real solidity. It's just an empty phenomenon. So it loses its threatening character, it loses its samsaric quality in this instant. As soon as I see it as it is, there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to attach to, there is just purity of mind. It's still there, it's still appearing, the rainbow is still there, the dynamic energy of anger might still be there for a moment, but it's the purity of mind, and it's an empty phenomenon. And if we see things in that way, we lose all our samsaric tendencies to catch onto them or to avoid them, to keep them away from our experience, because nobody would try to attach to a rainbow who knows the nature of a rainbow. We know you cannot catch or attach to a rainbow because they are empty. You cannot possess a rainbow. And if we see more and more that the world is actually an empty arising, an empty appearance, there is no catching onto it. This tendency to make it into more than it is, this samsaric tendency of resistance, of attachment and resistance, it falls away. And our sense of self falls away through that. And in the Buddhist tradition, you can actually approach emptiness from different points of view. In the traditional Mahayana Madhyamaka school, you start actually with the phenomena. You look into different kinds of attachments, you look into your visual perceptions, you look into your auditive perceptions, and you try to examine all these phenomena if they are empty. And this, of course, is a way to go. You can do it like that, but it takes a long time to actually go through all phenomena and establish their emptiness. It's much a quicker way, and that was the this is the genius side of Vajrayana, is if you go to mind directly, what Vajrayana establishes first is, it says, well, all phenomena, whether they are visual, auditive, or mental, emotional, all phenomena, they are experienced through what? Through the mind. So let's start where everything is experienced, in the mind. So Vajrayana goes directly to this common ground of all experience, which is our mind, and establishes the nature of this very mind that perceives, this very mind which experiences. And if you establish the emptiness of mind first, the nature of the mind, if you see that, then yeah, the whole thing collapses altogether more and more. And this is the quickest way to go about it, establishing, stabilizing emptiness.
Yeah, that being said, also the Tantric method is firmly founded on the Sutric way of looking into these various objects. So the one doesn't exclude the other. The Tantra contains both. And there is also, of course, Dzogchen Viparsana, or cutting through everything, seeing the complete emptiness, and then, just like we did yesterday, bringing back things. And then in Dzogchen Viparsana practice, we don't need to particularly, we can just sit with it. We can let that clarity embrace these various seemingly self-based phenomena, and then they kind of automatically unravel with that clarity. So, what was I going to say about? Yeah, there's that, Ugi, you mentioned, well, you mentioned something that made me think that was along the lines of that we don't have to become something else than we are. It doesn't necessarily change our personalities to see the emptiness of our personalities. So, for example, in my case, I have, there are certain people that don't have very strong emotions either way. Some people might have very strong positive emotions, but not very little negative emotions. Some people have lots of negative emotions, but not so much positive emotions. I have both, very strong negative emotions, very strong positive emotions. So it's kind of like I had a very unstable starting point. And it can also switch from pretty much 1 second to another. So what I find as I've progressed through this is not necessarily that change doesn't happen, but there is a common ground for the change, which is this emptiness, which is this, maybe stability is a better metaphor or better word to use to describe this. There is this basic stability, so that even though there is a lot of there are high peaks and low valleys, it doesn't completely take away the basic stability, the basic clarity. Almost said that some people, or if you lived with me, you might not recognize that, but that's the experience of it. And that stability is a major advantage, because then there is always that natural kind of questioning the validity of this. Is this just a samsaric? Is this real in one sense? Is this anger I'm feeling now is it, how to put this? Well, there is this constant examining of it. Whatever takes place, there is this constant examining of it, so that what started out as a practice of sitting down, okay, now I'm going to study these things, becomes second nature. It becomes more and more natural as emptiness realization progresses. I'm not done with the path. I'm not done with the Viparsana path. I haven't realized the Viparsana with a capital V, which is emptiness in all phenomena, automatically, effortlessly. But it is if I'm going to make a prophecy about how I think that will be, is that it won't flatten out that dynamic play of energy within me, which in my case I said is it can be low energy and then very high energy. I don't think it will flatten out that at all. It will just take away all of the filters, take away all of that effort that is that locks itself onto it, so that it's not exhausting in any way anymore. It's just naturally open and naturally allowed to play its course, without those self-based reference points.
And this is an important point that I think I know how you mean it. You said that this examining, this seeing of emptiness becomes second nature. It becomes second nature because it is our first nature. The clear seeing of emptiness is our first nature, and this is something that I discovered through the path so far. That even though in the beginning you think that these little glimpses of the natural state that you have, even if they are seconds or if they are longer, when you perceive emptiness, when you see that it's just this clarity, this wakeful clarity, when you see that for a second or longer, you kind of get the impression, okay, this is not the normal, this is not normality. It's like a breakthrough that you see. It gets very easy, it gets effortless for a moment, and then it clouds over again by your reference point-based samsaric mind. You get this sense of clarity, and then a second later, you're again back in this clear sense of here-ness and there-ness, and me versus the world, and me versus my thoughts, and me versus my emotions. It's all back, and you might get the impression that, this is my default mode, and I cannot imagine how it is to live in this clear seeing, in this empty recognition all the time. But the more you carry on with the practice, whether your rational mind notices it and can say every week, oh wow, now I made progress again, usually it's not like that. Your rational mind won't really support you that much on this stabilization of emptiness. You will not reach a point every week where the mind says, now I made progress. But with all the practices that we do, you stabilize emptiness, because emptiness is just seeing how things really are. It's the seeing of your Buddha eye. It's the seeing of your most natural mind. And sooner or later, you see that this is actually your default mode and has always been your default mode. It has just been distorted by these structures, by these filters, these dualistic notions of here-ness and there-ness and me-ness and otherness. And you begin to see that this is actually the effortless way of being, and all your mind-based samsaric mindfuck, if I am allowed to call it that, that is the effortful part, or that has always been the most effortful part. And there is a threshold in the practice where this started to actually, completely turn over from mostly dominantly samsaric fixations, and you think, oh, I will never get out of this, and this is just too strong, and these tendencies and this thinking and this it's all on and I can't get out of this. There is this threshold moment or this threshold period where you notice, okay, now it's turning into the opposite. Now your sense of samsaric duality, your sense of meanness and dareness becomes like the extraordinary in a sense. You begin to see that that stuff actually is the foreign part of your psyche and not the natural part of your psyche. And this happens around 11th Bhumi. You begin to recognize that this basic wakefulness is always on. When you open 11th Bhumi, you have, at least it was for me, it was like a light switch. Tack, it was on, this recognition. And I remember that afternoon when I was sitting in front of the computer, and I just noticed whether I was distracted by thought, something was on. I didn't have the feeling of like switching modes of being all the time. Like when I sat down on the meditation cushion and had these moments of clarity, I didn't have that feeling anymore that it's on and it's off. And it was like a light switch. And I noticed, okay, it's on all the time. And from there on, practice gets considerably different from the 11th Bhumi on, when this basic background sense of clarity, of wakefulness is pretty much always on. Then you have much more awareness of the clouds that cloud you over, or when you get, or the stuff that gets you distracted, the stuff that takes you away. So you can much easier look into that and establish the emptiness of every cloud, everything that still obscures your clarity in a sense. And also this stabilizes, and then comes a point where even the sense of distraction is integrated in the clarity of your natural state as well. Like where there really is no sense anymore that you have to do anything to establish the emptiness of that thought or the emptiness of that emotion that is really there. So even, you can say your practice itself becomes completely integrated in your life. There is no difference anymore between practice and non-practice, sitting on the cushion and not sitting. It's just everything is integrated in this clear seeing, and it's almost stabilized at this point. There are still very subtle clouds and stuff that can still trick you up, and further insight I cannot report from yet. But this is what happens. It gets stabler and more stable and more stable. And you experience not the absence of emotions all the time, but as Karl said, you experience just this evenness in everything that happens.
So it basically again comes back to this. What you experience is a lack of friction, a lack of conflicting emotions, in the sense, in conflicting beings within ourselves, because you can view the samsaric mind as comprised of several different kind of separate beings that are pulling in different directions. So you might have the one that wants to do good, the one that wants to destroy things, to put like the extremes, but you find the unifying principle of all these different beings, and which then is a lack of, results in a lack of conflict and an ease, to a natural ease and effortlessness to being, lack of seeking, so that what seemed to be at one point this huge great perfection is just this and just this and just this.
And you, exactly. And there are several qualities that you notice developing additionally to that in you. You don't become someone else, but you become more and more yourself in that, just how you are in this very moment. And yeah, through that, through being more and more yourself, you allow the world and everything and everyone to be its purest self as well. And this is the rising up of compassion, the rising up of bodhicitta. You begin to sense that beautiful connectedness to every sentient being and to the purity of every sentient being. And then bodhicitta just radiates from you completely naturally. You're consumed more and more only by that wish to that others see that as well, this freedom, this non-friction, this non-conflictedness internally. And that's how you know that you're making progress, actually, on the path, when you feel that more and more, this wish that others see that as well, because that is the best sign that you are making progress yourself, that you're getting something out of the practice. You notice less reactivity because you are not in that position anymore where you have to react to everything, because you're not identified with the reactor or the reacting anymore. And this tendency in you to react to stuff diminishes, and emotions and thoughts can flow freely. You notice less disturbing emotions in that sense. Less reactivity, self-based reactivity. You just notice certainty in yourself, about yourself. That's one of the most beautiful aspects of this practice, this most deepest, undoubtable sense of certainty that you have about, yeah, the most essential thing about existence, about yourself, about the world. And through that, you feel very much devotion to the Buddhas. You feel that to the gurus and to the Sangha and to the teacher. You feel more and more devotion. You feel more and more what a blessing you have been given to actually be able to practice all of that and to go through that road, and how absolutely in German, selbstverständlich, non-self, it's not for granted. You really notice that this whole dharmic path is a huge blessing and a huge gift, the biggest one you can be given. So you feel this immense gratitude towards the Buddhas, the Mahasiddha family, your teacher, the Sangha, and you begin to see all these little things the Buddha said, not only about the great perfection, but about compassion, about generosity. You begin to see how much sense all the Dharma teachings actually make. And you might have thought before, yeah, this one is not really something I understand, or this one I don't really get. You begin to see that, even the most simple advices the Buddha gives to live a more ethical lifestyle, or to be more generous, or to do good deeds, that's all included in this great purity of the mind. And you have this certainty about this. And yeah, there's nothing more nurturing, I would say.
Yeah, I think many can recognize that, for example, right after a retreat, that those qualities become much more present. You want to, this deep motivation to help others naturally comes forth, and that is, I think, also an aspect of a result of this conflict lessening and lessening. So you realign with that natural motivation. So it's in the word bodhicitta. So citta is both mind and heart, and body awake. So it is essentially, bodhicitta is the awakened mind. So you recognize that awakened mind, and it already contains all of those positive how do you say, emotions, positive qualities. So it's not emptiness as a complete lack of anything, but a complete lack of reference, self-based, egoic reference points.
Thanks, Karl and Ugi. Is there any questions others would like to ask or comments you would like to make? Feel free to test the understanding of or test your own.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's totally, I guess it's relevant, but I'd be interested in hearing more stories about how y'all actually practice, especially in early stages, and like what your practice looked like. Because I have a lot of questions about that, and before I found this sangha, you see all this stuff about like what Kim talks about, like you got to meditate 8 hours a day, or go live in a cave and meditate 20 hours a day, and yeah, so I would be interested in hearing more about what the practice actually looked like for you, and also maybe how you evaluated your own practice and adjusted it along the way.
So I've never practiced 8 hours a day. One thing that comes with this personality, of this unstable personality, is difficulty with routine. But that being said, so I struggled a lot when I encountered meditation prior to Pemako teachings. I was practicing various sutric forms of both, well, mostly concentration-based, but also some insight-based. But for me, it was a blessing when I discovered, so this was the first, Pemako was the first tantric teachings that I was introduced to. So I was given these tools, chanting, visualization. So it was something to do in one sense, like some there's a very physical component to chanting, to using the voice, which grounded me enough to be able to sit properly. But when I started out, there wasn't any online empowerments. So after the initial awakening using two-part formula, I started practicing the guru mantras. So guru yoga every day, several times a day sometimes, for I think it was about 3 or 4 months before I was introduced to rainbow body yoga, then Tibetan heart yoga, it was called. And for me, I think that was a really good starting point to really connect with, to really take the time to connect to gurus before I was introduced to any more like complex teachings. That being said, when I was introduced, when I received empowerment, that became the main practice, and then I would also include rainbow body yoga for other sessions. But I was pretty strict with rainbow body yoga every day for the first years. How to summarize shortly all like those years. So I pretty much stuck with that. I also I made a point out of going to all retreats because I felt that I needed that support. Really, retreats have been one of the main grounding factors for me, so that it's kind of a reality check every time. So I made a point out of joining all retreats, and so lately, to skip to that, so I had my first child earlier this year, so that has been one of the major kind of that has been a transition that has required some figuring out how to continue the practice properly, because of the time issue, the being constantly tired issue, and I haven't been able to keep this, but every day. But the main point is to have one sitting every day, and then in addition to that, try to make everyday tasks practice in one way or another, whether it's usually then it's mantra chanting. It can be either externally or just internal mantras to keep that connection, to keep that charge going. But it's still something I'm trying to figure out. And of course, the situation changes every week or so, constantly with different challenges with having a baby. But also here, I then try to come to retreats to make sure that I have proper time. Make sure that I take time for it, like proper sitting all days. I don't know if that answered your whole question, but. And I think for me, it's very easy to see when the practice is not working. And you said something about did you say validate the practice? It's very easy to see because of that, that kind of volatile expression that I have, or emotional expression, personality type. So it's very easy to see when I need to, when something's not working. There's this growing, for me, it's this growing frustration that if I'm not sitting enough, there's just this, I can just feel that, okay, I'm not sitting enough and I have to adjust the amount of sitting, or, well, maybe I haven't really had the problem that the quality of practice has been problematic because I've stuck to the basics, and to me that seems to work very well. Guru Yoga, Rainbow Body Yoga. The tantric aspect seems to kind of, well, for me it has been difficult to stray as long as I practice enough tantra. Yeah, but it's easy to tell if I'm not sitting enough, which perhaps has been my challenge.
Any follow-up questions to Karl then?
No, that's great. I know everyone's different, and so I think just hearing, actually that was very useful because I have some of the same problems. It's really hard for me to set a routine, and I get distracted by a lot of things. But also, one of the things that's been the most steady for me is doing guru yoga and mantras and just staying with, Guru Rinpoche basically all day long. I find that just comes really naturally. And the rest is a little bit of a crapshoot at times, but then also it's kind of a similar thing where I start noticing when I'm not sitting enough. And I'm like, okay, we need to get back to that more. So, but I'd also love to hear about, if you want to share, Ugi, I think having different perspectives is really helpful.
I just want to say one thing, and that I have found that is absolutely necessary, is that I sit straight away in the morning. If I know that it's going to be busy days, then just do it as early as possible, so that you don't have the chance to get distracted too much.
That sounds like great advice, and that is a tricky one for me, but I think you're right. I should really do that.
For me, yeah, well, I'm self-employed. I have my own thing that I'm doing, so I have a lot of time for practice. Since I started in the beginning of 2019 with Pemako practice, I awoke in 2016 through Kim's guidance, and then for 3 years I didn't do much, nothing from Pemako at least. So yeah, when I decided to start again with Pemako practice, or really started, I went with daily sittings of Rainbow Body Yoga. That was the thing that I just was committed to in the beginning, that I wanted to make this whole sequence once a day. Noticing the effect of that, and bringing me out of that stagnation that I had from my previous practice, which was a self-inquiry under the guidance of some non-dual teacher, where I got stuck because he basically told me, make the thought-free state longer and longer and longer. So just focus on the stillness. I thought there's something plateauing there. That's not really the way to go. So I came back to Pemako and to Vajrayana Buddhism and found the answer to that this really is not the correct practice to just sit in thought-free stillness. Yeah, then I started with Rainbow Body Yoga once a day, and I noticed the effect that, oh wow, yeah, this really is shifting things internally. I begin to experience myself differently. I begin to see that thoughts and emotions are not something to actually kind of bypass with your practice, or not go into, but that they are actually the path itself, that it's all about how you deal with your emotions and thoughts, which is where the practice happens. So I did with Rainbow Body Yoga, I did that daily, and after a few months I thought, okay, I want to expand, and did a second session a day, 20 minutes in the evening of Guru Yoga or Ati Yoga. And it's very interesting. There are different types of practitioners that I always observe. like you say, Ben, yourself, that you see that there are different types. There are more people who are more drawn to like deity practice, tantric practice, and there are people who are more drawn to maybe doing vipassana and this looking into thoughts and into the nature of thoughts. I definitely was one of them, or am still one of them. So my main practice besides guru yoga and rainbow body yoga has always been vipassana, looking into thoughts, the nature of thought. And this is something that helped me very much, because very early in the path I read a lot of Mahamudra manuals, and this is one tradition that Pemako is influenced by, or a part of Vajrayana tradition. And I got a lot of instructions from that as well, between what I received in retreats and in rainbow body yoga. And this helped me kind of keep on track, just reading manuals, not just reading, but putting them into practice. So I took a lot out of reading in this sense and applying it. And there I pretty early on made the decision for myself, and this is just practice-wise, a decision that I made for myself, or that I believed when I read it in the books, is that in the Mahamudra books, you read that focus your practice on thought, because thought is what, when you don't recognize thought for what it is, this is what makes samsaric distortion. So if you don't recognize the nature of thoughts, you then make a problem out of this feeling, or you make a problem out of this phenomenon, or make a problem out of basically anything that you can think of. So the instruction there was clear, to focus on thought in your practice. So I made very early on, I made that decision to really, really focus on this thinking mind, all my practice. And this helped me tremendously. And I think it was exactly the right path for me to focus on that so much, or almost exclusively. By that, I mean, I didn't examine like my visual perception, or I didn't examine feelings very much. I just looked at the thoughts which made the feeling into a problem, or the thoughts which created problems or challenges. So that was something that helped me very much. And I, as a Vipassana guy, I really focused on that practice mainly, up until this point, actually. So I'm really much a Vipassana guy, Sutric Vipassana. This helped me very much. Also in daily life, like the more you practice it, the more you start to apply it in your everyday life. But when it comes to recommendations for practice from my side, what is very important is to not push yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you think you are not practicing enough, or that you should do more. If you start to push or press yourself, you achieve the opposite. Practice loses its appeal. Practice becomes a drag, and you won't practice as much. So rather do less, but notice the joyful quality in that practice. Really go for quality. And as soon as you really go for quality in your guru yoga practice, as you say, Ben, or whatever you're doing, when you really go into the quality, it's much better to have 5 minutes of quality time with the gurus than 2 hours of forcing yourself to sit there and not feeling anything. And it brings you much more to really feel this 5 minutes. And this motivates you by itself to actually make that practice more and more your life, and then bring it more and more into your life. So that was actually a very interesting part of my path. I had this one moment where I realized, wow, so much suffering is gone now. And I could live like that now. Like that would be a good life, not much internal suffering anymore. And I for a moment I was like, uh-oh, am I now motivated enough to practice anymore when my own suffering is not the motivation anymore? Can I still motivate myself to practice when I feel good, when I feel basically happy? That was really a moment in my practice where I was insecure for a moment. And in this moment, I thought, okay, should I now should I kind of make myself more pressure, more negativity so that I have reason to practice, or should I just see what happens when I'm not motivated by suffering that much anymore? And I decided to go for just letting it happen, go with the positivity. And then that was a huge turning point in my practice again, when I saw that I'm really motivated to practice much more, even when I'm not coming out of my suffering, when I'm not suffering anymore, when I really do it for the joy of it, for the experience of it. So long story short, that's what I really recommend, to go for quality than for quantity, and then it takes care of itself. And yeah, ask the gurus as much as you can for support. Yeah, I think you're doing perfectly fine if you already are doing guru yoga or making it part of your day, besides formal sitting sessions. I think this is even more important, that you feel that connection and let that establish itself.
Thanks, Yugi. I think that's all really helpful. Definitely relevant advice. Appreciate it.
But at the same time, it's important with formal sessions.
Exactly.
Were you going to say something, Ben Epstein?
Yeah, so thank you, Karl and Ugi, for sharing your experiences and responding to questions. One thing I was thinking about, Kim had mentioned earlier about how emptiness should never be apart from practice, and in particular apart from tantric practice. And one thing I was thinking about and was hoping that one or both of you might comment on is just the role and I guess any kind of subtle aspects of emptiness in the context of deity practice versus guru yoga. My understanding is that deity practice, these empowerment deities, are embodiments of our own mind, enlightened aspects of the mind. Whereas these mahasiddhas, these gurus, are enlightened beings who are also highly accomplished, and their presence is something that isn't necessarily a mind-like archetype that the deities are, but rather these were and are enlightened Buddhas. So I'd just be interested if there's any, how would you describe the role of emptiness in deity practice and guru yoga? And if there is any subtle difference as a result of, these empowerment deities being somewhat different from these mahasiddhas.
Well, I think the one obvious difference is that so I mentioned, you also mentioned it in your question, that they are aspects, these deities. So I said that the samsaric mind can also be divided into, it can be seen as these various samsaric beings, as, for example, anger as a being, and these various emotions and self-based objects as different beings. So obviously the enlightened forms, practicing the enlightened forms, allows us to check out these various aspects according to our need. So one thing that happens with continued practice is that the intuition, or at least I should say that, well, I think that it's common. It happens for all practitioners, is that the intuition to what is needed at that particular point of time becomes you can intuit what is necessary, so that these different deities might appear on their own, or you have the feeling that, oh, I should practice this deity now. So it offers this flexibility, in our practice. Gurus, for me, they have a feeling more of like you actually hang out with someone who has attained the totality. So of course the deities are also, they have that totality within them, in the selflessness aspect of them, what unifies them. But you're hanging out with them, there can be a form of interaction in one way that is perhaps more so with gurus, that you can receive or that you can feel. They can highlight what is well, there's a guidance. There is that to a certain degree with deities as well, that there is a guidance, but I feel that it's more strongly with gurus, that you can receive direct guidance and direct instruction in the meditation for what is necessary at that point. Also, you get to then experience the whole being, like it's a being as complicated, or that was as complicated as us, that has then transformed or unified, integrated every aspect of themselves into this primordial emptiness, this purity. So perhaps there you could say that there is a complexity, there's nuances to gurus. Also in between gurus, you can see these actual different beings, how that realization manifests for different personalities, more so than with deities that represent a smaller aspect of our minds.
And what would you say is the role of emptiness in either of those practices?
The role of emptiness. Well, it is both Guru Yoga and Deity Yoga are have that Vipassana element built into them. So, but instead of approaching, as was mentioned, instead of just sitting down and allowing whatever comes up, or you can, of course, with sutric practices, you can also lure out the different things, but you still kind of approach it then from that, from the viewpoint, from the relative viewpoints, and then digging into each phenomena until you see that empty core. But with Tantric Viparsana, you establish that emptiness from the start by using the guru or the deity as a portal to the nature of mind, and then you can then use that. Once that is established, it naturally digs into those phenomena without you having to actually dig into each and every one. So it's instead of doing all those different things, you just feel into the guru, and naturally it releases. It clarifies the empty aspect of your own mind, of all the phenomena. So that was what was mentioned. It's time efficient.
I can only add one thing to that, perfectly described. When did I use in my emptiness practice, or when do I use gurus or deities? One is really this intuitive point. You know kind of what to do in the moment. You will get inspired to do like Vajrayogini in one moment because she just comes up somehow. But the role of emptiness and guru yoga in this in the practices, for me, has always been guru yoga is, the guru knows already. The guru has perfect knowledge of everything. So you don't have to do everything yourself. And when I'm kind of get tricked up in practice, like when doing Hatha yoga, and I kind of lose track of like what is what now, like when I'm clouded somehow, then I know it's time to do guru yoga, because I don't know what to do in this very moment. I don't have a clue anymore what to do. So then that's the moment for me to relax back, to surrender to someone who knows. And these are the gurus or deities at times. And this has saved my ass and my practice countless of times, just doing that as one of the most important aspects that I was blessed to learn from Kim here, to do exactly that, to not trying to do everything yourself, because you will get tricked up so easily. So yeah, that's the moment when emptiness practice turns then into guru yoga again for me. It's just, okay, letting go, surrendering into the big boss or the big bosses. And then you get a pointing out instruction from them again, and then they show you again, and then, and then you kind of, okay, thanks for holding my hand. I tried to walk a little bit myself again. And then you fall over again, and then, okay, please pick me up again. Very harmoniously. It becomes very harmonious, or it is very harmonious, this balance.
And there's one important point, that not all samsaric confusion is immediately visible. So you have those gross phenomena that are more or less easily examined, but then there are hidden aspects, much more subtle aspects, and I'm talking about substrate consciousness, which is not immediately visible at all times, and both the guru's blessing will reach that naturally, and also you can use wrathful deities to highlight those particular parts of the psyche, so that they do become visible.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and gave me a few things I feel like I can integrate into my practice. So I appreciate it.
Karl, you mentioned, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned about hanging out with the gurus. And I assume that is outside of what would be the formal sitting practice, say during the day. Is that what you would have meant? Is that what you were referring to?
Both, but it can happen. Of course, that's guru yoga is hanging out with gurus, also in informal sessions.
In the informal session.
In the formal, I mean, in sitting, while practicing, while sitting down to practice.
Yeah, and are you conscious of it? Well, evidently you are in the ordinary when you're out and about during the day.
Yeah, it can happen. Yeah.
Yeah. In what ways does it actually happen? For example, you're in Tromsø, and so you're walking around, you're out walking or whatever. Could you just maybe just a little bit on that?
Yeah. So what I've found when practicing more is that it naturally have if you, well, I'm not going to say a specific number of hours, but if you have formal sessions if you get in proper time of formal sessions, then it's much more easy to recognize, at least at the outset, that it just becomes natural that either it can be just suddenly feeling the presence, or sometimes it might need a little bit of help, so saying the mantras a few times, or it might be that you need to say the mantras a little bit more. But there are various, it both happens spontaneously, and you can bring them up during the day, and it's felt pretty much the same. Although of course in activity you don't necessarily have the opportunity to study each part to study it the same way, but it's the same presence. You feel it in your body. The qualities of the nature of mind become apparent. Emptiness, as we are speaking of now, the aliveness aspect. So it's not much different. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And the purpose of my question really was when you said hanging out with, I suppose I regard hanging out with someone as informal, you know?
All right.
Yeah, informal. No, but I get what you're saying there, because you mentioned the word spontaneous, because certainly over the past while, I would, that spontaneous contact or the feeling, without actually going and seeking, the feeling would come while I'm out walking, or even it could be when I'm driving, and I was just wondering, like, is that what you're talking about? But yeah, I see what you're saying about there not being much difference between the two, but it was just the informality of the hanging out was actually the part. It was.
Yeah, I see what you mean, and maybe I was using formal, informal, the distinction a little bit differently, just between actually sitting down, now I'm going to practice, and then just every day. But the thing is that also formal sittings have an informal quality, as they start having this in the sense that there's this casualness to also formal sittings that seems to develop. So you might not be it's not tightly bound by rules, in the sense that now I have to focus so and so many minutes on this, and then go to this, and then it becomes more relaxed and effortless. But yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, are you saying, Karl, that it's necessary to have the formal practice and to have your daily practice? That's what you're saying, to have the daily practice in order to have that informality and that spontaneity during the day.
I think that's where it starts. Yes, that's where it starts for most, that you have to take time to sit. It's not enough to it's not enough for me to only sing mantras when driving, or when doing the dishes, or when walking around with the baby. I have to sit down in order to relax properly so that it can completely, so I can properly marinate in it.
Yeah. Thanks, Karl. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question about the deities, the raffle deities, the gurus. I mean, it seems to me it's like a toolbox here where they all have different qualities, and you turn to them. Say you have a problem with anger or something, you'll turn to a deity or a raffle deity or whatever. But it seems to me it's a bit like you're pulling out a spanner to unblock a sink. Can you give me an example of which deity or a raffle deity I would turn to with a problem in my practice?
I'm not sure if I'm in a position to, based on, I mean, it depends on the problem. Perhaps I would go to gurus then first, Guru Rinpoche, for general problems. And then practice. The thing is, I was saying that it develops that intuition and the sensitivity. With increased practice, the intuition develops so that you then become more aware yourself, not spontaneously, of what is necessary at any particular time. So I don't think that, like, there is not one deity that is good for all problems that you encounter. But if you practice Kuru Yoga and you practice Rainbow Body Yoga, practice all of the deities together in the mantra, and also become more familiar with the individual deities by taking time to study them. Like adding in a session with only Vajrayogini one day, or 1 week or 2 weeks to properly get to know the deity, and then go through the whole list. With that familiarity comes that, then that intuition comes, so that you will know, or not even, it doesn't have to be rationally that, oh, now I need to practice that, but it's just that is what that deity will make itself present when it is a particular problem that that deity can help out with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Karl made a very important point here. We can kind of approach our practice sometimes instrumentally, like very intentionally, but it also makes very sense to familiarize yourself with a certain practice, like in many different mind states that you're in. When you're feeling good, when you're feeling bad, when you're feeling this, when you're feeling that. If you kind of just familiarize, that was the word, with the practice in different mind states. So you start to get you really get to know the practice through that. But if you only use wrathful deity practice, for example, when you're pissed off or something, then you won't really get the nuances of that practice. So that's just two approaches: to kind of keep with the practice and familiarize with yourself, and kind of leave out the instrumentality part on your part, like using it to achieve something in a certain way practice wise, and just kind of do it for practice sake, to get to know to the practice. And through that familiarization, you can then also use the practice more efficiently in certain situations. Like, for example, I do when I feel like plateauing in a certain sense, or when it's suspiciously peaceful for too long, then I might use a wrathful deity practice to kind of shake things a little bit, to rattle the cage a little bit. And yeah, that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have familiarized myself through the practice. And I think that's a very important thing about rainbow body yoga, for example, because it's a practice sequence on a daily basis, and in whatever state you're in, you're doing that every day, and you get to know the practices through that in a very holistic manner, like not only when you're feeling good, not only when you're feeling bad.
It's like any art, that it starts out by following some guidelines, but then at one point the structure is not as necessary anymore, so that you develop beyond the structure, so that you know intuitively what is necessary. But of course, you need to then study it first. You need to properly take the time to become familiar with it.
Okay, great. Really, well, I wouldn't say that long, but necessarily long, and lots of details, practice, important points of practice, how to do it, how not to do it, and of course there would be also maybe useful to have a discussion. I remember in one of the Lion-Faced Guru podcast episodes, we talked about this and problems with not understanding emptiness in a correct way. So maybe if you haven't learned, I don't remember which episode it was, but in some of those anyway, I think that we have talked about it with Karl and Ugi. So you can look into that if you like. But yeah, thank you for this presentation, Karl and Ugi. Thank you for questions and comments. And I think it's time to take a break. So let's stop now and continue at 7 p.m. So hour and 15 minutes of break. Thank you, everyone. See you in 75 minutes.